On Christmas Eve, my 9-year-old son found a note from my parents. "We're off to Paris. Please move out by the time we're back." His hands were shaking, and he held my hand. "Mum." I didn't shout. I took my phone and made a small change. They saw what I did and went pale. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and cloves. I'd been making mulled wine since morning, an old habit from the years when Christmas Eve meant something, when the house filled with laughter that wasn't performed for anyone's benefit. My hands moved through the familiar motions. Orange peel curling away from the knife, star anise dropping into the pot, the deep red wine releasing its warmth into the cold December air. Oliver was in the living room, supposedly watching a Christmas film, but I could hear the irregular rhythm of his footsteps. 9 years old and still unable to sit still when he was excited. He'd been like that since he could walk, always in motion, always reaching for the next thing. His father used to say it was a sign of intelligence, all that restless energy. His father used to say a lot of things. "Mum?" Oliver appeared in the kitchen doorway, his dark hair sticking up at odd angles. He'd been lying on the carpet again, probably with his face too close to the television. "When are Nan and Granddad getting back?" I glanced at the clock. 4:30. They'd gone out that morning for what my mother called last-minute bits, a phrase that usually meant she'd forgotten something crucial and needed to maintain the illusion that Christmas at Whitmore House was effortless, spontaneous, a natural extension of their generosity, rather than a carefully orchestrated production. "Soon, love, why don't you help me with the mince pies?" He wrinkled his nose. Dad never liked mince pies. "I know." He said they were filled with sadness disguised as fruit. I laughed, surprising myself. It had been 2 years since Marcus left, and there were still moments when the memory of him caught me off guard, not with pain anymore, but with a strange, hollow recognition. Like seeing a photograph of a room you used to live in. Your father had very specific opinions about Christmas food. He had specific opinions about everything. Oliver climbed onto the kitchen stool, his legs swinging. "Mum, are we staying here forever?" The question landed somewhere in my chest, in the space where I kept all the things I wasn't ready to explain. We'd been living with my parents for 18 months now, ever since the divorce settlement revealed that Marcus's investments had been creative accounting for his gambling debts. The house in Richmond, the one we'd painted Oliver's room pale blue in, the one where I'd planted roses that never quite thrived, had been sold to cover what he owed. My parents had offered their guest suite with the kind of casual generosity that made refusal feel ungrateful. "Not forever," I said. "Just until I've saved enough for a place of our own. I like it here." He picked at a loose thread on his jumper. "But I miss our old house sometimes. I miss having my own garden." "I know, love. And Gran gets cross when I leave my shoes by the door." I didn't respond to that. My mother got cross about a great many things, most of them involving Oliver's inability to exist as silently and tidily as she preferred. At 9, he was too old to be adorable and too young to be interesting, caught in that awkward middle space where his presence was tolerated rather than enjoyed. The front door opened. I heard the familiar sounds of my parents returning, my father's heavy tread, my mother's lighter steps, the rustle of shopping bags, the particular way she sighed when she set down her keys. There was a murmured conversation in the hallway, too quiet to make out the words, but I caught the tone, tense, deliberate. "Oliver, go wash your hands before we start on the pies." He slid off the stool and disappeared upstairs. I turned back to the mulled wine, stirring slowly, waiting for whatever was about to happen. I'd developed an instinct for it over the months we'd been here, the subtle shifts in atmosphere, the way silence could thicken before my mother entered a room. It was like living with weather patterns. You learn to read the pressure changes. They came into the kitchen together, which was unusual. My father typically retreated to his study after shopping trips, emerging only when called for dinner, but here he was, standing just behind my mother, his face carefully neutral in a way that made my stomach tighten. "Darling," my mother set her handbag on the counter, the Hermes one, the one she only used when she wanted to remind herself that she could afford it. "We need to have a conversation." "Of course." I turned off the heat under the wine. "What about?" She glanced at my father. He didn't meet her eyes. "Perhaps we should sit down," he said. I didn't move. There's a particular feeling when you know something terrible is coming. Not fear exactly, but a strange clarity. Like the air itself becomes sharper, more defined. Everything slows down just enough for you to notice details you'd normally miss. The way my mother's hand trembled slightly as she adjusted her scarf, the barely perceptible sweat along my father's hairline, despite the cold outside. Just tell me. We've made a decision. My mother's voice was calm, practiced. I wondered how many times she'd rehearsed this speech in the car. Your father and I are going to Paris tomorrow. We'll be celebrating Christmas there this year. Paris. The word felt strange in my mouth. Tomorrow is Christmas Day. Yes, well, change of plans. I waited. There was more. I could feel it hovering between us, unsaid. We think it would be best, my father started, then stopped. He looked at my mother, a silent handoff of responsibility. Best if you found alternative accommodation, she finished, before we return. The kitchen was very quiet. I could hear the clock ticking, the distant sound of Oliver's footsteps upstairs. I looked at my mother, at the careful blankness of her expression, the way she held herself slightly apart from me, as though what she was saying might be contagious. You're asking me to leave. We're suggesting that the arrangement has run its course. She smoothed her jacket, a gesture I recognized from my childhood, the signal that the conversation was proceeding as planned, that she was in control. You've had 18 months to get back on your feet. We've been more than patient. It's Christmas Eve, Mom, which is why we're giving you the rest of the holiday week. We won't be back until January 2nd. That's plenty of time to make arrangements. I heard Oliver coming down the stairs. The sound seemed to come from very far away, as though I was listening through water. Where exactly do you expect me to go? That's not really our concern, is it? My mother picked up her handbag. You're 41 years old, Laura. It's time you stopped expecting other people to solve your problems. She walked out of the kitchen. My father hesitated, opened his mouth as if to say something, then followed her. I stood there, hands still damp from the orange peel, watching the doorway they'd disappeared through. Oliver came back into the kitchen. Mom, Nan and Granddad just went upstairs. They looked cross. Are they cross about my shoes again? No, love. My voice sounded normal. I was distantly impressed by this. They're just tired from shopping. Can we do the mince pies now? Soon. Why don't you go pick a Christmas film? I'll be there in a minute. He ran off toward the living room. I heard the television come on, heard him cycling through options, his commentary drifting back to me. Boring. Seen it. That one's sad. I stayed in the kitchen, staring at nothing, trying to make what had just happened feel real. 18 months. I'd been grateful for 18 months, careful for 18 months, small and quiet and unobtrusive for 18 months. I'd cooked dinners and cleaned bathrooms and kept Oliver out of their way and thanked them. God, I'd thanked them so many times, for the roof over our heads, for the generosity they reminded me of at every opportunity. I'd endured my mother's comments about my failed marriage, my father's distant disappointment, the constant subtle reminders that I was a guest in my childhood home rather than family. And now, on Christmas Eve, they were flying to Paris. I thought about the guest room upstairs, the room they'd given us, the one with the single bed for Oliver and the pull-out sofa for me. My mother had redecorated it before we arrived, removing anything personal, anything that might make it feel like ours. So you don't get too comfortable, she'd said, and I'd pretended not to understand what she meant. The mulled wine had gone cold. I poured it down the sink and started again. Dinner was excruciating. My mother had ordered a light supper from the caterer she used when she didn't feel like cooking, which was most of the time, now that I thought about it. For 18 months, I'd been making their meals, and before that, the housekeeper had done it. I couldn't remember the last time I'd actually seen my mother prepare food. The caterer had provided cold salmon, asparagus, and a potato salad that no one touched. Oliver ate in near silence, glancing between me and his grandparents, trying to decode the atmosphere. He was always doing that, watching, reading the room, adjusting himself to fit whatever shape seemed safest. He'd learned it from me, I realized. I'd taught him that survival meant becoming whatever the people around you needed. Oliver, my mother said, in the bright, performative tone she used when she wanted to seem like a good grandmother, what did Father Christmas bring you last year? He looked at me. The Lego set? The big one? That's right, my mother smiled, the public smile, all teeth and no warmth. And what are you hoping for this year? I don't really know. Every child knows what they want for Christmas. Oliver's shoulders hunched. A dog, maybe. Oh, my mother's smile flickered. Well, perhaps when you're older. When I'm older and we have our own house, Oliver said, and I watched my mother's expression freeze, then thaw into something harder. Yes, when you have your own house. My father cleared his throat. Laura, about the arrangements. I've left some information on the desk in the study, numbers to call, that sort of thing. Emergency housing, if needed. Emergency housing. I kept my voice neutral. Thank you, Dad. It's just a precaution. I'm sure you have friends who could. He trailed off. We both knew I didn't have friends who could. The divorce had been isolating in ways I hadn't anticipated. Not just financially, but socially. Marcus and I had moved in certain circles, attended certain events, knew certain people. When he left, those people chose him. They'd always been his friends, really. I'd just been permitted to borrow them. I'll figure it out, I said. Of course you will. My mother dabbed her lips with a napkin. You always do. Oliver pushed his salmon around his plate. Nan, can I be excused? We're still eating. But I'm finished. Sitting quietly while others eat is a basic social skill, Oliver. You'll need to learn it eventually. I watched my son's face close off. That careful blankness he'd developed over the past 18 months, the protective nothing that children learn when adults are unsafe. My heart cracked along a familiar line. Go on, love, I said. You can be excused. He slid off his chair and disappeared before my mother could object. I heard his footsteps on the stairs, quicker than usual, nearly running. You undermine me constantly. My mother's voice was ice. Is it any wonder he doesn't respect me? He's 9, Mum. He was bored. When you were 9, you sat through 3-course meals without complaint. When I was 9, I was terrified of you. The words escaped before I could stop them. They hung in the air between us, too honest, too real. My mother's face went very still. Well, she stood gathering her plate. I suppose that explains quite a lot. She left the dining room. My father stared at the table, at his hands, at anything that wasn't me. Laura, don't. I stood too. I'm going to check on Oliver. I found him in the guest room, sitting on his bed, staring at the wall. His face was red, but his eyes were dry. He'd learned not to cry around his grandparents. They had opinions about tears. Hey, I sat next to him. You okay? He nodded, then shook his head, then shrugged. A cascade of contradictions that children use when they don't have words for what they feel. Nan doesn't like me. That's not true. Mum. He looked at me, and I saw something old in his eyes, something too knowing for 9. It is true, and you know it's true. So why do you always say it isn't? I didn't have an answer. I'd spent 18 months lying to him about the subtle cruelties of my parents' hospitality, telling him that Nan was just particular and Granddad was distracted, and that we were lucky, so lucky to have a roof over our heads. I don't know, I finally said. I suppose I wanted you to believe something kinder than the truth. Is that why we're leaving? My chest seized. Who told you we're leaving? I heard them downstairs when they got back from shopping. He picked at his bedspread. They said we had to go, that we'd been here too long. Oliver, is it my fault? Because I leave my shoes by the door and I'm too loud and I ask too many questions? No, I pulled him close, felt him stiffen and then relax, burrowing into my shoulder the way he had when he was little. None of this is your fault. Do you understand? This is not about you. Then why do they want us to leave? Because some people... I stopped. Tried again. Because some people have very limited space in their hearts, love. It's not that they don't love us. It's that they don't know how to love the way we need. He was quiet for a long time. Mum, are we going to be okay? Yes. I said it with more certainty than I felt. We're going to be absolutely fine. I didn't sleep that night. After Oliver drifted off, I lay on the pull-out sofa and stared at the ceiling, my mind cycling through the same impossible calculations. Rent in London, deposit requirements, my savings account balance, the cost of moving, the practicalities of finding somewhere to live in the dead week between Christmas and New Year when the entire country shut down. I had enough in savings for a deposit, barely, but only if I found somewhere cheap, and cheap in London meant compromises I didn't want to make. It meant Oliver sharing a bedroom with me. It meant neighborhoods where the parks had needles in the grass. It meant giving up on the idea of temporary and accepting that this was just life now. At some point in the small hours, I got up and went downstairs. The house was dark and silent, my parents long since retired. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea I didn't drink, watching the garden through the window, the frost glittering on the lawn, the bare branches of the apple tree, the moon hanging fat and white above the rooftops. It was Christmas Day. In a few hours, Oliver would wake up expecting presents, expecting magic, expecting the performance of joy that Christmas required. I thought about my parents in Paris. They'd booked the flight months ago, I realized. The tickets would have been bought in advance, the hotel reservation made, the whole thing planned while they smiled at me across the dinner table and asked how my job search was going. They'd been waiting for this, waiting for the right moment to tell me, and they'd chosen Christmas Eve. My phone buzzed on the table, a text from my brother, David, who lived in Edinburgh with his wife and 3 children, who hadn't spoken to our parents in 6 years, who'd tried to warn me before I moved in. "Happy Christmas, sis. How's the Whitmore experience treating you?" I typed a response, deleted it, typed another. "They're going to Paris. They want me out by the time they're back." The 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Christ, on Christmas Eve? Yes. A longer pause. Then, "I'm sorry. I wish I could say I was surprised. You're not." "No, but I'm still sorry." A moment later, "Call me if you need anything." "I mean it, Laura. We're here." I put the phone down. David had escaped our parents the hard way. Years of therapy, a complete break, the slow, painful process of rebuilding himself without their approval. I'd always thought his choice was extreme, had believed that I could manage them differently, could maintain a relationship through careful navigation and strategic acceptance. I'd been wrong. The sky was starting to lighten. I went upstairs to shower and dress, to paste on the face Oliver needed to see when he woke up. We would have Christmas. We would open presents and eat chocolate and watch films and pretend that everything was fine. I would figure out the rest later. Oliver woke at 7, vibrating with excitement despite everything. He didn't mention the night before, didn't ask about leaving, threw himself into Christmas with the determined enthusiasm of a child who has learned to take joy where he can find it. We opened presents in the living room while my parents were still asleep. I'd hidden the gifts in the back of the wardrobe, afraid to put them under the tree in case my mother criticized the wrapping or the choices, or the presumption of celebrating in her house. "Mom, look!" Oliver held up the Lego set I'd found secondhand online, his face lit with genuine delight. "It's the Hogwarts Express. Is it what you wanted?" "It's perfect." He was already tearing into the box. "Can we build it now?" "After breakfast." "But Mum—" "After breakfast, love." He grumbled but acquiesced, spreading the instruction booklet across the carpet while I made toast and eggs. The kitchen still smelled faintly of mulled wine from yesterday. I'd never quite cleaned up properly. I was scraping butter onto bread when I heard footsteps on the stairs, my mother's particular tread, unhurried and deliberate. She appeared in the doorway wearing her dressing gown, the silk one with the embroidered collar. Her hair was perfect, her face composed. Even first thing in the morning, she looked camera-ready. "Happy Christmas," I said. "And to you." She moved past me to the coffee machine, not meeting my eyes. "We'll be leaving for the airport at noon. The car is coming at 11:30. "Right. I've left instructions for the house, the alarm code, the heating schedule. Make sure everything is locked when you leave." "Of course." She poured her coffee, added precisely 1 teaspoon of sugar, stirred it exactly 3 times. These small rituals, I thought. These precise routines that substituted for actual feeling. "Oliver seems happy with his presents," she said, glancing toward the living room. "He is." "Good, that's good." She took a sip of coffee, grimaced, added another half teaspoon of sugar. "Laura, about yesterday." "Don't." My voice came out sharper than I intended. "Please, let's just get through this morning. You can go to Paris and I'll handle the rest. But please don't pretend that what you're doing is normal or acceptable or anything other than what it is." She looked at me then, and for a moment I saw something flicker across her face. Surprise, maybe, or the barest shadow of shame. It was gone almost immediately, replaced by the familiar mask of indifference. I've always found self-pity unattractive, she said, and walked out of the kitchen. They left at 11:45. My father shook my hand at the door, an awkward formal gesture that belonged to business associates rather than family. My mother kissed the air near my cheek and reminded me about the alarm code. Neither of them said goodbye to Oliver, who had retreated to the guest room with his Lego, refusing to come down. I stood at the window and watched the car pull away. The driver, someone from the service they used, held the door open while my parents climbed in, my mother adjusting her coat, my father checking his phone. They didn't look back at the house. They didn't wave. The silence after they left was enormous. I stood in the hallway for a long time, not sure what to do with myself. The house felt different now, larger somehow, and more hostile. I'd never noticed before how little of us was in it. No photographs on the walls, no toys left out, no evidence that a child lived here. We'd been so careful, so invisible. "Mom?" Oliver was standing on the stairs, clutching a half-built section of the Hogwarts Express. "They're gone?" "Yes, love, they've gone." He came down slowly, looking around as though seeing the house for the first time. It's weird without them. Good weird or bad weird? I don't know. He sat on the bottom step. Both, maybe. I sat next to him. The staircase was cold. My mother disliked heating unnecessary spaces. "Oliver, there's something I need to tell you." He went still. "About leaving?" "Yes, Nan and Granddad want us to find somewhere else to live, before they come back from Paris." "I know, I heard them yesterday." "I know you did, and I'm sorry you had to hear it that way. I'm sorry about a lot of things." I took his hand. "But I want you to know that we're going to be okay. I have some savings, and I'm going to start looking for a flat today. And even if we have to stay somewhere temporary for a bit, we'll be together. That's what matters." "What about Christmas dinner?" The question was so practical, so Oliver, that I laughed. "I suppose we'll have to make our own. What do you think? Pizza? Pizza on Christmas?" "Why not? It's our Christmas now. We can do whatever we want." He considered this. "Can we get one with pineapple? Nan says pineapple on pizza is common. We can get two, one with pineapple, one without. And can we eat in the living room, on the sofa? On the sofa, with a film." His face brightened just slightly, not a full smile, but the promise of one. "Okay," he said. "Okay, Mum." We ordered pizza at 2 o'clock and ate it in front of the television, watching Home Alone for the 4th time that winter. Oliver laughed at all the same parts, shouted warnings at the screen, got tomato sauce on the sofa cushion, and froze, waiting for me to be angry. When I just wiped it off and kept eating, he relaxed into something I hadn't seen in months, genuine comfort. Afterward, we built the Hogwarts Express together. Oliver handled the small pieces, his fingers more nimble than mine. I managed the larger sections, following his instructions, letting him be the expert. The afternoon stretched out, golden and quiet, and for a few hours I let myself forget what was waiting. At 6 o'clock, I put Oliver to bed early with the promise of a Boxing Day trip to the cinema. He fell asleep almost instantly, exhausted by the emotional whiplash of the past 2 days. I sat on the edge of his bed and watched him sleep, the flutter of his eyelashes, the slight parting of his lips, the absolute trust of a child at rest. Then I went downstairs to my father's study. He'd said he left information on the desk. Emergency housing numbers, he'd said, as though homelessness was just another administrative problem to solve. I found the folder easily, beige, unmarked, placed precisely in the center of the desk. Inside were printouts from various council websites, phone numbers for shelters, a list of affordable housing options that were neither affordable nor available. He'd done his research. He'd prepared. I was about to close the folder when I noticed the papers beneath it. They were official documents, the kind with letterheads and stamps and signatures. I recognized the logo immediately, Harrison and Partners, the law firm my parents had used for as long as I could remember. The name on the top of the first page made my heart stop. Last Will and Testament of Charles Edward Whitmore, my father's will. I shouldn't have read it. I knew that, even as I picked up the papers, even as I carried them to the desk lamp for better light. This was private. This was none of my business. This was exactly the kind of violation that my mother would use to justify everything she'd ever thought about me. I read it anyway. The will was dated 6 months ago. The first few pages were standard: executor appointments, funeral wishes, the usual legal language. Then came the distribution of assets. To my son, David Charles Whitmore, I leave the sum of £500,000 to be paid from my estate upon my death. David, my brother who hadn't spoken to them in 6 years, £500,000. To my daughter, Laura Elizabeth Whitmore, I leave the sum of £20,000 to be paid from my estate upon my death, conditional upon her having obtained stable employment and independent housing at the time of my death. Should these conditions not be met, her share will revert to the residual estate. 20,000, conditional. I kept reading. The residual estate, including Whitmore House and all remaining assets, is to be held in trust for my grandchildren, Thomas David Whitmore, Emma Grace Whitmore, Anna Catherine Whitmore, David's children. All 3 of them, named specifically, provided for generously, with the exception of Oliver Marcus Whitmore, who shall receive no share of the trust or residual estate. I read that line again, and again the words didn't change. My son, my 9-year-old son, explicitly excluded from his grandfather's will. There was no explanation, no justification, just that single brutal sentence, buried in the middle of a legal document. Oliver Marcus Whitmore, who shall receive no share. I set the papers down. My hands were shaking. I noticed this distantly, as though observing someone else's body. The room felt very far away. Everything felt very far away. My parents had been planning this. Not just the eviction, not just the Paris trip, but this. They'd sat down with lawyers and decided that their grandson, their daughter's only child, was worth nothing. Less than nothing. Worth explicitly, deliberately excluding. I picked up the will again. Underneath it was another document. A letter, handwritten, in my mother's precise script. Charles, I've reviewed the draft and have one concern. The language regarding Oliver may provoke legal challenge if Laura becomes aware before your death. I suggest we add the attached codicil, which frames the exclusion as concern for his welfare rather than rejection. Harrison says this will reduce risk of contest. Additionally, we should accelerate the timeline for Laura's departure. Her presence is becoming disruptive, and I worry that her attachment to the house may complicate matters when the time comes. The Paris trip provides a natural opportunity. Margaret, a codicil. They'd written a codicil to make Oliver's exclusion sound like caring. They'd planned their concern for his welfare as legal protection. I sat in my father's chair, in my father's study, holding proof of what my family actually was. Not complicated, not difficult, not limited in their capacity for love. Cruel, simply, plainly cruel. I didn't sleep again that night. I sat in the study until the early hours, reading and rereading the will, the letter, the codicil. Each time I hoped I'd misunderstood something. Each time, the words remained exactly as terrible as they'd been before. At some point, I made tea. At some point, I moved to the living room. The house was silent around me, a silence I now understood differently. All those months of trying to be invisible, of keeping Oliver quiet, of gratitude and accommodation, none of it had mattered. They'd already decided. Before we'd even moved in, probably. They'd looked at my son and seen something excludable, something worth legally erasing. When dawn came, gray and reluctant through the curtains, I was still awake. I heard Oliver stirring upstairs, heard him pad to the bathroom, heard the flush and the running water. In a few minutes, he'd come downstairs expecting breakfast, expecting normalcy, expecting me to have figured out what came next. I went to the kitchen and started making pancakes. "Mum?" He appeared in the doorway, rubbing his eyes. "You didn't sleep." "How can you tell? You've got that face. The one from when Dad left." My heart cracked a little more. "I'm fine, love. Just thinking. About where we're going to live." "Yes, but I've got some ideas." I flipped a pancake, watched it bubble. "How do you feel about staying with Uncle David for a bit? Just while I sort things out?" His face went through several expressions. Surprise, confusion, a tentative hope. "In Edinburgh? Really? If he says yes, I'm going to call him this morning." "But Nan and Granddad don't talk to Uncle David." "No, they don't." He was quiet, processing this. "Is that why they want us to leave? Because you're going to talk to him?" "No, love. They wanted us to leave before I found the letter." "What letter?" I set down the spatula. This was the moment. the fork in the road where I could lie, could protect him, could wrap the truth in comfortable packaging and hand it to him softened. Or I could tell him something closer to the truth, in a way that a 9-year-old might understand. Granddad wrote some things down, legal things, about what happens when he dies. Like in the films, when people read the will? Exactly like that. And in his will, Granddad left money to lots of people. Uncle David, your cousins, but not us. Not you. Oliver's face was very still. Why not? I don't know. Is it because I'm too loud? Or because I leave my shoes? Oliver, stop! I knelt down to his level, took his hands in mine. This is not your fault. Do you hear me? None of this is because of anything you did. Granddad made a choice, a cruel choice, and it says everything about him and nothing about you. But he's my granddad. Yes, he is, and sometimes I search for the words. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love us don't know how, and sometimes they don't want to know how, and when that happens, we have to love ourselves enough to walk away. Even if it hurts, especially if it hurts. He looked down at our joined hands, at my fingers wrapped around his smaller ones. Is that what Uncle David did? Walked away? Yes, 6 years ago, and I'm starting to think he was the bravest person in our family. I called David after breakfast. He answered on the second ring. Laura, happy Boxing Day. How are you holding up? I found Dad's will. Silence. On the line. Then, you knew? Not the details, but I guessed. After what they did to me, he exhaled heavily. I'm not surprised they do the same to you, to Oliver. He specifically excluded Oliver, by name, in a codicil designed to prevent legal challenge. Jesus. Mum wrote a letter. She called our presence disruptive. She said they needed to accelerate the timeline. Laura, I'm so sorry. I tried to warn you. I know you did. I didn't listen. I pressed my palm against my eyes. David, I need a favor, a big one. Anything. Can Oliver and I come stay with you, just for a few weeks, while I find somewhere to live? Of course you can. You don't even have to ask. I heard him moving, heard him calling to someone in the background, his wife probably. When can you get here? Tomorrow, if I can book a train. Book it. We'll pick you up at the station. David, don't thank me. Don't apologize. You're my sister. Oliver's my nephew. This is what family does, real family. He paused. Unlike those people. I laughed, a wet, broken sound. Mum would hate being called those people. Mum can hate whatever she likes from the comfort of her Parisian hotel room. I'll text you our address. The rest of Boxing Day passed in a blur of practicality. I booked train tickets for the following morning. Absurdly expensive, holiday prices, but I didn't care. I packed our things, which took less time than I expected. 18 months of living here, and we'd accumulated almost nothing. A few clothes, Oliver's books, his Lego. We fit into 2 suitcases and a backpack. Oliver was quiet throughout, helping where he could, not asking too many questions. He understood, I think, more than I gave him credit for. Children always understand more than we think. That evening, we ate leftovers in the kitchen and talked about Edinburgh. He'd been once, when he was small, for Uncle David's wedding. He remembered the castle and the cobblestones and the man playing bagpipes on the Royal Mile. Will there be snow? He asked. Maybe. It's colder up there. I've never made a snowman in real snow, only in pretend snow, at school. If it snows, we'll make the biggest snowman Edinburgh has ever seen. He smiled, a real smile, not the careful, cautious one he wore around his grandparents. Mum, are you sad about Nan and Granddad? I considered the question. I'm disappointed. I think I hoped, for a long time, that they would be different, better. And finding out they won't be, it hurts. But it's also a kind of freedom. Freedom? When you stop hoping someone will change, you can stop waiting for them. You can start building your own life, your own way, without them. He thought about this. Is that what we're doing? Building our own life? Yes, love, that's exactly what we're doing. I woke up at 3 a.m. with perfect clarity. The will, the exclusion of Oliver, the conditional inheritance, the whole elaborate cruelty of it. It was designed to work in silence. My parents had assumed I would find out after my father died. when challenging it would be complicated and expensive. They'd assumed I would accept it, the way I'd accepted everything else. But I had found out now, and more importantly, I had proof. I went to the study and photographed every page of the will, the codicil, my mother's letter. I emailed the images to myself, to David, to a third address I barely used. Then I sat at my father's computer and started researching. The Whitmores were old money, not aristocracy, but close enough. My grandfather had built a construction empire in the post-war years. My father had sold it in the 90s for a sum I'd never been told precisely, but which I knew was substantial. They had investments, properties, connections. They sat on boards. They donated to causes. They were, in the parlance of their social circle, comfortable. But old money had structures, trusts, tax arrangements, complex webs of ownership designed to minimize inheritance liability and maximize dynastic control. I'd never paid attention to any of it, had never been invited to pay attention, but I knew the basics. I knew, for instance, that my father had 3 directorships, and that at least one of them was a family trust that held property. I also knew, because I had lived in this house for 18 months and made myself useful in small ways, that my father kept his passwords in a leather notebook in his desk drawer. It was foolish, and I'd told him so once, but he was of a generation that didn't trust digital storage. If someone breaks in and steals my notebook, he'd said, I'll have bigger problems than a hacked email. The notebook was exactly where I remembered it. I opened his computer and logged into his banking portal. What I found took my breath away. My father had multiple accounts, current accounts, savings accounts, investment accounts, a pension portfolio worth more than I'd earn in a lifetime. But it wasn't the amounts that shocked me, it was the beneficiaries. Every single account, without exception, had my mother listed as primary beneficiary and David's children listed as secondary. Not me, not Oliver. I clicked through to the family trust. Here the numbers became almost abstract. Properties in London, a flat in Monaco, an investment portfolio managed by a Swiss bank. The beneficiaries were my parents jointly, then David, then David's children. A 4th tier had been added 6 months ago. Charitable distribution. They had chosen charities over their own daughter, over their grandson. I sat back in the chair, my heart pounding. I thought about all the times my mother had complained about my financial irresponsibility, the failed business, the divorce, the fact that I'd trusted a man who turned out to be a con artist. I thought about how she'd offered to let us stay, how generous she'd seemed, how grateful I'd been. It had never been generosity, it had been control. Keep us close enough to manage, dependent enough to manipulate, invisible enough to forget. And when the time came, when my father died and the lawyers read the will, we'd discover that our 18 months of careful invisibility had earned us exactly nothing. There was one more tab open on my father's computer, a draft email, unsent, addressed to Harrison and Partners. Whitmore Family Trust. Amendment: please prepare documentation to remove Laura Whitmore as secondary signatory on the trust operating account. Her access was granted provisionally and is no longer required. Additionally, please amend the trust documentation to explicitly exclude any future claims by her descendants, including Oliver M. Whitmore. Attach the same protective language used in my personal will. I will sign upon my return from Paris. Charles, secondary signatory. I'd been given access to the trust account. I vaguely remembered signing something, years ago, when David first stopped speaking to them and they needed an alternative family member for some banking requirement. I'd never used the access, had frankly forgotten it existed. But it existed, and my father was about to remove it. I looked at the clock. 4:17 a.m. Paris was 1 hour ahead. My parents would be asleep in whatever luxury hotel they'd booked, preparing for another day of tourist activities funded by money they'd decided their grandson wasn't worth. I made a decision. There's a moment in any significant choice when the mind goes quiet. The racing thoughts stop. The anxiety fades. You see the path in front of you, clear and irrevocable, and you step onto it. I logged into the trust operating account. My access as secondary signatory was limited. I couldn't make large withdrawals, couldn't alter the trust structure, couldn't do anything that would trigger alerts. But I could see everything, every transaction, every investment, every property valuation. And I could make small changes. Administrative changes, the kind that looked like routine maintenance. I found the property records first. Whitmore House was held in the trust, as I'd suspected, a tax arrangement that meant my parents lived here as beneficiaries rather than owners. The flat in Monaco was similar, but there was a third property I hadn't known about. A cottage in Cornwall, purchased 15 years ago, currently listed as unoccupied. 15 years ago was when Oliver was born. I searched the trust communications, going back through archived emails and documents, and there it was. A letter from my mother to the trust manager, dated 2 months after Oliver's birth. Dear Mr. Harrison, following recent family developments, my husband and I wish to establish clear boundaries regarding the trust property. Please ensure that the Cornwall cottage is not made available to any family member without explicit written consent from both primary beneficiaries. Additionally, please prepare documentation confirming that any children born to our daughter Laura will not automatically inherit beneficiary status in the trust. We prefer a discretionary approach to future generations. Regards, Margaret Whitmore. They'd started planning Oliver's exclusion when he was 2 months old, before he could walk, before he could speak, before they knew anything about who he would become. I closed my eyes. The rage I felt was clean and cold. Nothing like the hot, messy anger of confrontation. This was something else entirely. This was clarity. I couldn't take their money. Even if I wanted to, the access restrictions prevented it. But I could do something else. I could tell the truth. The train to Edinburgh left at 8:15 a.m. I spent the hours between 4 a.m. and 7 a.m. preparing. First, I compiled the documents, the will, the codicil, my mother's letter, the trust communications, the Cornwall cottage records. I created a timeline showing how they'd systematically excluded Oliver from birth, planning his invisibility with legal precision. I wrote a summary, factual, unemotional, devastating in its simplicity. Then I identified the recipients. My parents had a social circle. Board members, charity trustees, old friends from the construction industry days, people who thought of Charles and Margaret Whitmore as pillars of the community, people who would be shocked, or at least pretend to be shocked, to learn what they'd done. I also found the email addresses for the charities listed in my father's will, the organizations he'd chosen over his own grandson. They had donor relations departments, public profiles, reputations to maintain. Finally, I found the contact information for the local newspaper's features desk. They'd run a series last year on community heroes, profiles of prominent local figures doing good works. My parents had been featured in March, photographed outside Whitmore House with carefully arranged smiles. I drafted the emails, I attached the documents, I scheduled them to send at noon on January 2nd, the day my parents were due to return from Paris. Then I woke Oliver, fed him breakfast, and loaded our suitcases into a taxi to the station. The train was nearly empty. Holiday travelers had gone home already, and the serious business types wouldn't resume until after New Year. Oliver and I had a table to ourselves, watching the winter countryside slide past. Brown fields, gray skies, occasional clusters of houses. Mom? Oliver was drawing in a notebook I'd packed. Abstract shapes that might have been trees, or might have been something else entirely. What's going to happen when Nan and Granddad get back? I don't know exactly. This was true. I had scheduled the emails, but I hadn't decided whether I would actually let them send. There was still time to cancel, to delete, to retreat into the silence that had defined my relationship with my parents for decades. But I think things are going to be different. Different how? Honest? Maybe. I think I'm going to stop pretending that everything is okay when it isn't. He considered this. Is that why Uncle David doesn't talk to them? Because he stopped pretending? Yes, partly. Was he scared? I think so. I think he was very scared. But he did it anyway. Oliver set down his pencil. I'm scared sometimes. About where we're going to live, about school, about whether I'll make friends. Those are sensible things to be scared of. But you're not scared? I looked at my son, his dark hair, his serious eyes, the small crease between his brows that appeared when he was thinking hard. He looked like Marcus, around the mouth and chin, but he had my eyes, my father's eyes, actually, the family resemblance that would mean nothing now. I'm terrified, I said. But I've realized something. Being scared doesn't mean you can't act. It just means you're paying attention. David and his wife, Sarah, met us at Edinburgh Waverley with their youngest, Anna, who was 5 and vibrating with excitement about her new house guests. David looked older than I remembered, more gray at his temples, deeper lines around his eyes, but he hugged me with the same warmth he'd always had. "Welcome to Scotland," he said. "You look terrible." "Thank you, it's been a challenging few days." "I bet." He picked up one of our suitcases, nodding to Oliver. "Hey, mate, remember me? You're the one who let me hold the bagpipes at your wedding." They were very small bagpipes, decorative. I still have the photo. "Do you?" David grinned. "That's brilliant. Come on, the car's just outside." The drive to their house took 40 minutes, through streets I didn't recognize, past landmarks that meant nothing to me. I watched Edinburgh slide past, stone buildings, Christmas lights still up, people bundled against the cold, and felt something I hadn't felt in 18 months. Possibility. David's house was a Victorian terrace in a neighborhood called Stockbridge, filled with books and toys and the cheerful chaos of 3 children. Sarah, who worked as a GP, had taken the week off. She installed us in the guest room with the efficiency of someone used to organizing other people's lives. "Dinner's at 6, she said. "There's tea in the kitchen and wine if you need something stronger. The kids will probably want to show Oliver their toys, so be warned. He may not emerge for hours." "Thank you." The word felt inadequate. "Really, thank you. Don't be silly, you're family." She said it so easily, as though it were obvious, as though being family meant showing up when people needed you, rather than calculating their worth on legal documents. I went to the guest room and cried for the first time since Christmas Eve. That night, after Oliver was asleep in a borrowed bed, and the adults had gathered in the living room with wine, I told David and Sarah everything. The will, the codicil, the Cornwall cottage, the scheduled emails. David listened without interrupting, his face growing darker as I spoke. Sarah sat very still, her hand on his knee, her expression carefully neutral. When I finished, the room was silent for a long moment. "So you've scheduled the emails," David said finally, "to go out on the 2nd. "Yes. But you haven't decided if you'll let them send." "No." He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. "You know what will happen if you do. They'll deny it first. Then they'll claim you forged the documents. Then they'll try to have you declared unstable, probably. They'll hire lawyers. They'll use every tool they have to protect their reputation." "I know. And even if you win the public battle, even if everyone believes you, you'll never speak to them again. Neither will Oliver. That's the end of any relationship." "What relationship?" My voice was harsher than I intended. "They were planning to cut us off completely. They'd already started. All I'm doing is choosing the terms of the separation." "No." David's voice was quiet. "What you're doing is choosing revenge." The word hung in the air between us. I wanted to deny it. Wanted to say it was about truth, about justice, about Oliver's right to know what kind of people his grandparents were. But David had known me since childhood. He could see through the noble framing. "Maybe," I admitted, "maybe part of it is." "I don't blame you." He sat forward, meeting my eyes. "When I found out what they'd done to me, the way they'd written me out, the things Mum said behind my back, I wanted revenge too. I wanted to expose them, humiliate them, make them feel even a fraction of what I felt. But you didn't." "No, I didn't." He glanced at Sarah, some unspoken communication passing between them. "I chose something else instead. I chose to walk away, completely, no contact, no explanation, no dramatic revelation, just silence." "And you're saying I should do the same?" "I'm saying there's a cost to both paths, and you need to decide which cost you're willing to pay." I thought about this. The emails were sitting in my drafts, scheduled but not sent. A single click would cancel them. A single decision would return me to silence, to the careful invisibility I'd maintained for 18 months. But Oliver's face kept appearing in my mind. The way he'd asked if it was his fault. The way he'd learned to move through my parents' house like a ghost. The way he'd been so carefully, deliberately erased from his own family's future. "They excluded him," I said. "They looked at a newborn baby and decided he wasn't worth including. They planned it for 9 years. They made it legal. And they were going to let him find out after his grandfather died, when he was old enough to understand exactly what it meant." "Yes," David said. "They did. And you think I should just walk away from that?" Let them get away with it? I think getting away with it isn't really the question. He reached for his wine, took a long sip. Our parents are old. Dad's heart isn't great, you probably noticed. They're going to die, Laura. Maybe soon, maybe not, but eventually. And when they do, all their money, all their planning, all their elaborate cruelty, it won't matter anymore. They'll be gone. The only thing that will remain is what you and Oliver carry with you. Exactly. And what I want Oliver to carry is the knowledge that someone stood up for him, that someone said publicly that what they did was wrong. Is that what you want, or is it what you need? The question stopped me. I opened my mouth to answer, found I couldn't, closed it again. The revenge I wanted, David continued, wasn't really about making them pay. It was about making myself feel less powerless, less small. I'd spent my whole childhood being made to feel like nothing they did was ever quite good enough, and when they finally confirmed it in writing, I wanted to prove that I could hurt them back. He shook his head, but hurting them wouldn't have changed who I was. It wouldn't have made the childhood trauma disappear. It would just have given them more evidence that I was exactly what they always said, emotional, irrational, unworthy of their money and their name. So you stayed silent to prove them wrong? No, I stayed silent because fighting them meant keeping them in my life. Every legal battle, every public dispute, every moment of revenge. It would have kept them alive in my head, taking up space, defining who I was. And I decided that the best revenge, the only revenge worth having, was to build a life so good that I didn't need them in it at all. I looked around the room, the books, the children's drawings on the fridge, the photos of holidays and birthdays and ordinary moments. David had done exactly what he'd said. He'd built something good. It took years, he added. Therapy, work, more therapy. There were times I almost gave in, almost sent the emails I'd drafted, almost burned everything down, but I didn't. And now, gestured at the house, at Sarah, at the life they'd made. Now I barely think about them at all. But Oliver, I said, he deserves to know. Does he? Right now, at 9 years old? Sarah spoke for the first time, her voice gentle. Or does he deserve to grow up without his identity being defined by their cruelty? What do you mean? If you send those emails, if you make this public, Oliver becomes the boy whose grandparents didn't want him. That's his story, forever. Every article, every social media post, every whispered conversation, he'll be the center of it. Even if people sympathize, even if everyone agrees that your parents are monsters, he'll carry that label for the rest of his life. I hadn't thought about it that way. I'd been so focused on justice, on truth, on making my parents face consequences, that I hadn't considered what it would mean for Oliver to be publicly identified as the child who wasn't wanted. But if I stay silent, I said, they win. Do they? David leaned forward. What does winning look like to you? I didn't have an answer. I didn't sleep that night either. I lay in the guest room, listening to Oliver's breathing, watching the shadows on the ceiling. The house was quiet around us, creaking slightly, the way old houses do, settling into the cold. David was right about one thing. Revenge wouldn't change who I was. It wouldn't undo 9 years of conditional acceptance, of being tolerated rather than loved. It wouldn't give Oliver a different set of grandparents. Couldn't transform Charles and Margaret into people capable of unconditional affection. The emails would embarrass them, might damage their reputation, might even cost them some of their precious social standing, but it wouldn't heal anything. And yet, there was Oliver's face when he asked if it was his fault. There was my mother's letter, so cold, so calculated, so utterly devoid of love. There was the codicil, designed specifically to prevent us from fighting back. They had spent years constructing a legal architecture to ensure that their cruelty was unassailable. Walking away felt like letting them get away with it, but fighting felt like letting them define the terms. Around 4 a.m, I got up and went to the kitchen. David was already there, sitting at the table with a cup of tea and an unlit cigarette. Didn't know you smoked. I don't, this is a prop. He twirled the cigarette between his fingers. Sometimes when I can't sleep, I come down here and pretend I'm about to start a terrible habit. It's soothing. I sat across from him. I've been thinking about what you said, and I still don't know what to do. He nodded, unsurprised. There's a third option, one I didn't mention earlier. What's that? Don't send the emails to the board members and the charities. Don't make it public. He met my eyes. But send them to Mum and Dad. Privately, let them know what you found. What would that accomplish? I don't know. Maybe nothing. Maybe they'd deny it. Pretend they never wrote those things. But maybe... He paused, considering. Maybe they'd realize that you're not the person they thought you were. That you're not going to stay silent forever. That you have power to, even if you're choosing not to use it. That sounds like a threat. It is a threat, but a private one that gives them a choice. Acknowledge what they've done and make some kind of amends, or live knowing that you could expose them at any moment. He set down the cigarette. It's not revenge. It's not silence. It's something in between. I thought about my parents in Paris, sleeping in their luxury hotel, assuming that everything was proceeding according to plan. In a few days, they'd return to England, sign the papers removing my access to the trust, and continue their lives as though Oliver and I had never existed. Unless I changed the game. I wrote the email at 5 a.m. It was shorter than the ones I'd originally drafted. No lengthy exposition, no detailed timeline, no appeals to morality or justice. Just the facts, laid out simply. Mum and Dad, I found the will, and the codicil, and the letter Mum wrote to Harrison and Partners. I know what you've done. I know you planned Oliver's exclusion from the day he was born. I know about the Cornwall cottage, the trust amendments, everything. I've copied all of the documents. I've shared them with David. I've prepared emails to your board members, your charities, and the press, scheduled to send on January 2nd. I'm not going to send them, yet. But I want you to know that I could, at any time. That the story you've been telling about yourselves, the generous parents, the devoted grandparents, the pillars of the community, could be replaced with the truth in an instant. I'm not asking for money. I'm not asking you to change the will. Oliver and I don't want anything from you anymore. What I'm asking for is acknowledgement. A conversation, not for my sake, but for his. He deserves to understand why his grandparents made the choices they made. He deserves an explanation, even if it's not a good one. If you're willing to have that conversation, let me know. If not, the scheduled emails will stay where they are, a permanent reminder of what you could lose. Laura. I didn't send it immediately. I saved it as a draft and went back to bed, lying awake until the gray morning light crept through the curtains. Oliver woke at 8, full of energy, desperate to explore his cousin's toy collection. I watched him run upstairs to find Emma and Thomas, his footsteps loud on the Victorian stairs, and thought about what David had said, that Oliver deserved to grow up without his identity being defined by their cruelty. But maybe there was another way to think about it. Maybe Oliver's identity didn't have to be defined by what his grandparents did. Maybe it could be informed by it, shaped by the knowledge that he had survived something difficult and emerged stronger. Or maybe that was just me rationalizing what I wanted to do. Sarah made breakfast, eggs and toast, and proper Scottish bacon, crispy at the edges. The children ate noisily, arguing about whose turn it was to sit in the special chair, a wooden stool with a slightly higher seat than the others. David and Sarah moved around each other with the practiced ease of long marriage, handing off plates and refilling juice glasses without needing to communicate. This, I thought, this is what family looks like. After breakfast, I went to the guest room and opened my laptop. The email was still in drafts, waiting. I read it through one more time, checking for errors, for anything that could be misinterpreted. Then I added one more line at the bottom. P.S. I haven't canceled the scheduled emails. If I don't hear from you by January 5th, they send automatically. Consider this your opportunity to control the narrative. I hit send. The rest of the holiday passed in a haze of exhausted normalcy. David and Sarah were gracious hosts, including me in their routines without making me feel like a burden. Oliver spent his days playing with his cousins, building elaborate Lego constructions that spread across the living room floor. I walked around Stockbridge, getting to know the neighborhood, imagining a life here, a flat nearby, a new school for Oliver, the slow work of rebuilding. My parents didn't respond to my email. On December 30th, I checked my scheduled emails and confirmed they were still there, waiting in the queue. On December 31st, I watched the fireworks over Edinburgh Castle from David's rooftop terrace, Oliver wrapped in a blanket beside me, and tried not to think about what would happen in 2 days. On January 1st, my mother called. The kitchen making tea when my phone rang. I saw her name on the screen and felt my heart stop. Hello, Mum. Laura. Her voice was clipped, controlled, the tone she used when she was trying to sound calm while being anything but. We need to discuss your email. Yes, we do. You've made some serious accusations. They're not accusations, they're facts. I have the documents. A pause. I could hear my father in the background saying something I couldn't make out. We're not having this conversation over the phone, my mother said. We'll be back in London tomorrow evening. We expect you to meet us at the house. I'm in Edinburgh. Then get on a train. Her voice hardened. Or don't. But if you want that conversation you mentioned, you'll be at Whitmore House by 7 o'clock tomorrow. Your father and I have things to say. She hung up. I stood in the kitchen, holding the phone, staring at nothing. David appeared in the doorway. Was that? Yes. And? They want to meet, tomorrow, at the house. He nodded slowly. Are you going? I don't know. What does your gut say? I thought about it. The old Laura would have gone immediately, would have apologized for the inconvenience, would have hoped that maybe, this time, they'd finally see her. The new Laura, the one who'd spent the last week building something different, wasn't sure what to do. My gut says I should stay here, I said. With Oliver, with you. Let them come to me for once. Then do that. But what if they don't? Then you'll have your answer. He shrugged. Either they care enough to make the effort, or they don't. Either way, you'll know. I didn't go to London. Instead, I sent another email. I'm not coming to Whitmore House. If you want to have this conversation, you can come to Edinburgh. David has offered to host. Let me know. The response came within an hour. This is absurd. We're not traveling to Scotland to negotiate with you. I didn't reply. At 6:58 p.m. on January 2nd, 2 minutes before the scheduled emails were set to send, my phone rang again. Fine. My mother's voice was strained, almost unrecognizable. We'll come to Edinburgh, but you will cancel those emails immediately. I'll cancel them when you're on the train. Laura, those are my terms, Mum. Take them or leave them. A long pause. I could hear her breathing, could imagine the fury she was suppressing. We'll be there on the 4th. Tell David to expect us by noon. She hung up again. I opened my laptop, looked at the scheduled emails, and moved them to January 10th. They arrived at 12:47 p.m. on January 4th. I watched from the upstairs window as the taxi pulled up, as my parents emerged looking older and smaller than I remembered. My mother was wearing her travel coat, the cashmere one, but there was something defeated in her posture, a slope to her shoulders that I'd never seen before. My father walked slowly, carefully, as though the pavement might shift beneath him. David met them at the door. I heard the murmur of greetings, artificially polite, the kind of conversation people have when they're pretending not to hate each other. Sarah had taken the children out, a planned absence, giving us space for whatever was about to happen. Oliver had gone with them, reluctantly. He'd wanted to stay, to see his grandparents, to understand. Soon, I'd promised him. Once I know it's safe. I went downstairs. My parents were standing in the living room, looking around at David's house with the particular expression they reserved for things that didn't meet their standards. My mother's gaze lingered on the children's drawings on the fridge, the toys stacked in the corner, the comfortable chaos of a home where people actually lived. Laura, my father nodded at me. You look well. Dad, shall we sit? David gestured toward the sofa. Tea? Something stronger? Nothing, thank you. My mother perched on the edge of an armchair, her handbag clutched in her lap like a shield. Let's just get this over with. I sat across from them. David remained standing, arms folded, his back to the fireplace. You read my email, I said. Yes. And the documents? Yes, my father looked at his hands. We didn't know you had access to the trust portal. I didn't until recently. You gave me signatory access years ago, remember? That was meant to be temporary. Apparently, I kept my voice steady. So here we are. What did you want to say? My mother glanced at my father. Some unspoken communication passed between them, the kind that married couples develop over decades, a private language of looks and small gestures. We made decisions, she said finally. About the will, about Oliver. We made them for reasons that seemed sound at the time. What reasons? Another pause. My father cleared his throat. Oliver's father, father, he said. Marcus. We had concerns. From the beginning. Concerns? About his character, his reliability, his honesty. He shifted uncomfortably. We worried that any inheritance involving Oliver might ultimately benefit Marcus, that he might contest custody, use the child to gain access to family money. Marcus and I have been divorced for 2 years. He has no custody rights. He signed them away voluntarily. We didn't know that would happen at the time. At the time Oliver was born, I kept my voice level. You started excluding him when he was 2 months old, before Marcus showed any signs of being untrustworthy. Silence. The truth, I continued, is that you didn't trust me. You assumed I'd made a bad choice in marrying him, and you punished Oliver for it, before he could walk, before he could speak. That's not. Mum wrote a letter asking the lawyers to confirm that Oliver would never inherit when he was a baby, when he'd done nothing wrong. I pulled out my phone, read from the screen. Any children born to our daughter Laura will not automatically inherit beneficiary status. That's what she wrote. My mother's face was pale. I was trying to protect the family. The family? Oliver is family. He's your grandson. She stopped, pressed her lips together. Say it. He's not. She looked at my father, desperate for help. He's not what you wanted, I finished for her. He's loud, he's messy, he has too much energy, and he asks too many questions. He's everything you spent my whole childhood trying to train out of me, and you couldn't stand to watch it happen again. That's not fair, isn't it? I leaned forward. Tell me one memory you have of Oliver, one specific moment, anything. She opened her mouth, closed it, looked at my father. He built that Lego castle, my father offered weakly. The big one, last summer. I built that castle, I said. He helped. But you wouldn't know because you never watched. The room was very quiet. David hadn't moved from his position by the fireplace. But I could feel his attention, his silent support. We weren't good parents, my mother said suddenly. The words seemed to surprise her as much as they surprised me. To you, or to David, we know that now. Do you? We were raised a certain way, expected to raise you the same way. Children were meant to be managed, controlled. We didn't know another approach. That's not an excuse. No, it isn't. She looked down at her hands. But it's an explanation, for whatever it's worth. I thought about all the years I'd spent trying to earn their approval. The careful grades, the appropriate friends, the marriage to a man who seemed stable and successful. I'd done everything they wanted, become everything they asked, and it had never been enough. What do you want? I asked. From this conversation, what are you hoping I'll do? My parents exchanged another look. We'd like you to delete the emails, my father said, the ones you have scheduled. And in exchange, we'll reconsider the will, make some adjustments. What kind of adjustments? We could add Oliver back in, not as a primary beneficiary, but something, a token, enough that he wouldn't be explicitly excluded. A token. It's better than nothing. I sat back. The offer was insulting, and they knew it. A token inheritance for Oliver, £10,000 maybe, enough to technically include him, while still making clear that he was worth less than his cousins. They were bargaining, trying to find the minimum they could give to make the problem go away. No, I said. My mother's head snapped up. What? I don't want your money, neither does Oliver. I stood, walked to the window, looked out at the Edinburgh street, the gray stones, the bare trees, the ordinary life happening outside this room. I spent 18 months living in your house, being grateful, trying to be small enough that you'd let me stay. And the whole time, you were planning to throw us out. You were writing letters about how disruptive we were. You were making sure that even after you're dead, Oliver will know he wasn't wanted. Laura, I'm not going to let you buy your way out of this. You can't add a few £1,000s to the will and pretend that makes up for 9 years of deliberate cruelty. I turned back to face them. But I'm also not going to destroy you. Those emails stay in my drafts. If you leave us alone, really alone, no contact, no drama, no attempts to control or manipulate, they'll stay there forever, unsent. And if we don't, then everyone finds out exactly who you are. My father's face was gray. My mother's hands were shaking. "You're blackmailing us," she said. "I'm protecting my son. There's a difference. We could fight this, hire lawyers, challenge your access to those documents. You could, but by the time you won, if you won, the damage would be done. Those emails are sitting in a queue. If anything happens to me, if my account is compromised, if I don't manually intervene to stop them, they send automatically. Every 2 weeks, I update the schedule. If I forget, or if I'm unable to," I shrugged. "Well, you'd better hope I stay healthy." The room was silent. David finally spoke. "I think we're done here, Batas." My parents stood moving slowly, like people recovering from an illness. My mother gathered her handbag, smoothed her coat. My father buttoned his jacket with trembling hands. "We'll leave then," my mother said, "if that's what you want." "It's what I need." "And Oliver?" I thought about my son. Out somewhere in Edinburgh with Sarah and the cousins, probably getting hot chocolate or looking at the castle. He'd ask about this meeting when he got back. He'd want to know what happened, what was said, whether his grandparents loved him after all. "Oliver will decide when he's older whether he wants a relationship with you. I won't stop him, but I won't force him either." "Fair enough." My father's voice was barely audible. "I suppose that's fair." They walked to the door. David opened it, stood aside. My mother paused on the threshold. "We did love you," she said, "in our way. We just didn't know how to show it." "I know, Mum. And we're sorry for what it's worth." I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. They walked down the path to their waiting taxi. I watched them go, two elderly people, smaller than I remembered, carrying secrets they'd never fully acknowledged. The taxi pulled away. The street was quiet again. David closed the door. Oliver came home at 4 o'clock, full of stories about the castle and the hot chocolate and the busker who'd played guitar outside the cafe. He talked through dinner, through bath time, through the bedtime routine, his energy seemingly inexhaustible. I let him talk. I didn't mention his grandparents, didn't ask what he thought about them, didn't try to guide his feelings in any particular direction. He'd learn eventually about what they'd done, but not yet, not today. When he was asleep, I sat on the edge of his bed and watched him the way I had on Christmas Eve. The flutter of his eyelashes, the slight parting of his lips. He looked peaceful, unburdened. "I'm going to do better," I whispered. "I promise." He didn't hear me. He was dreaming already of something far away. The next few months were difficult in the way that all new beginnings are difficult. I found a flat in Stockbridge, small, a bit shabby, but affordable, and close to David's house. Oliver started at a local primary school in February, nervous at first but adapting quickly. Children are resilient in ways that adults forget. I took a job at a bookshop, not glamorous, barely paying the bills, but enough. My parents stayed away, as promised. I heard from mutual acquaintances that they'd returned from Paris subdued, that my mother had stopped hosting her usual dinner parties, that my father had quietly resigned from 2 of his board positions. Whether this was guilt or fear or simply age catching up with them, I couldn't say. I didn't want to know. I kept the scheduled emails, updating them every 2 weeks, as I'd said I would. It became a ritual, in a way. A reminder of what I could do, what I was choosing not to do, the power held in reserve. Oliver asked about his grandparents once, in March, when a classmate mentioned going to visit her grandmother over the Easter holiday. "Are Nan and Granddad ever going to come here?" "I don't know, love. Maybe someday." "Do they not like me?" "They have trouble showing love to anyone. It's not about you." He accepted this with the matter-of-fact wisdom that children sometimes have. "That's sad for them," he said. "Yes," I agreed. "It really is." A year later, almost to the day, I received a letter, handwritten on my father's personal stationery, addressed to me at the Stockbridge flat. "Dear Laura, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect anything really, but I wanted you to know that I've changed the will. Oliver is included now, not as an afterthought or a token, as a full beneficiary, equal to David's children. The trust has been amended accordingly. The lawyers have confirmed it. I've also established a separate account for him to be held until he's 25. Enough for university, for a house deposit, for a start in life. It's not much compared to what he could have had if we'd been different people. But it's something. Your mother doesn't know I've done this. She would disapprove, and I don't have the energy for that fight anymore. When I'm gone, she'll find out. By then, it will be too late to change. I'm dying, Laura. The doctors say 6 months, maybe less. My heart, as it turns out, was never as strong as I pretended. I don't expect to see you. I understand why you've stayed away. But I wanted Oliver to know, someday, that his grandfather tried to do right at the end. Even if it was too late, I'm sorry. For everything, Dad. I read the letter 3 times. Then I put it away in a drawer and didn't look at it again. My father died on October 15th. I found out from David, who found out from the lawyers. No one called me directly. No one invited me to the funeral. I didn't go anyway. Oliver, 10 years old now, asked why we weren't going to say goodbye to Granddad. Because some goodbyes, I told him, are said in other ways. Like what? Like living well, like being happy, like not letting the people who hurt us decide who we become. He thought about this. Is that what you're doing? I'm trying. The will was read on October 28th. David called me afterward, his voice strange, a mixture of shock and something else I couldn't identify. He did it, he said. Oliver's in there, equally. I know, he wrote to me months ago. And you didn't tell me? I didn't know if it was real. I didn't trust it. A long pause. There's something else. What? Mum's contesting. She found out about the changes after he died, just like he said she would. She's claiming he wasn't of sound mind. I thought about my father's letter, the careful handwriting, the precise language, dying but lucid. She won't win. No, she won't, but she's going to try. Another pause. The lawyers want to know if you'll testify. About his mental state, about the letter he sent. I looked around my small flat, the secondhand furniture, the books stacked everywhere, Oliver's Lego creations covering the coffee table. A year of building something new, a year of being free. Yes, I said, I'll testify. The hearing was in December. My mother sat across the courtroom, looking smaller and older than I'd ever seen her. She didn't meet my eyes. Her lawyers made their arguments. Sudden changes to the will, potential undue influence, signs of cognitive decline. They painted a picture of a vulnerable old man, manipulated by estranged children into betraying his beloved wife. I told the truth. I told them about the letter he'd sent, the careful handwriting, the apology that took 60 years to arrive. I told them about Christmas Eve, about the scheduled emails, about the choice I'd made to hold power rather than use it. I told them about Oliver, asking if it was his fault. My mother's lawyers tried to discredit me. They called me bitter, vindictive, estranged for a reason. They implied that I'd coerced my father, that the changes to the will were my doing, that I was the villain in the story. But I had the documents. The original will, excluding Oliver by name. The codicil, designed to prevent challenge. My mother's own letter calling our presence disruptive. When the judge read those documents aloud, my mother's face went white. She lost. The will stood as my father had written it. Oliver was included. David's children were included. The family money, more than I'd ever imagined, enough to change our lives, would be distributed according to his final wishes. My mother left the courtroom without speaking to me. I never saw her again. Oliver is 16 now. He knows the whole story. I told him on his 13th birthday, when he was old enough to understand. He read the documents, asked questions, spent a few weeks being angry at people he'd never really known. Then he moved on, the way children do when they're loved enough. He used part of his inheritance for a robotics program last summer. He's talking about studying engineering at university. Maybe here, in Edinburgh, or maybe somewhere further away. He's growing into someone kind and curious and resilient. Someone who understands that family isn't always blood. I never sent the emails. They're still there, in my drafts, scheduled to send every 2 weeks unless I intervene. I update them religiously, even now, even though my mother is gone and there's no one left to threaten. It's become a habit, I suppose. A reminder. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd sent them, if I'd chosen revenge instead of restraint, explosion instead of patience. Maybe my parents would have suffered more. Maybe they would have fought back harder. Maybe Oliver and I would still be struggling, caught in an endless legal battle instead of building a life. But I don't think I would have found peace. Peace, it turns out, isn't about making others pay for what they've done. It's about refusing to let their choices define you. It's about taking the power they never wanted you to have and using it to build something they could never imagine. On Christmas Eve this year, Oliver and I made mulled wine together, the old recipe, the one from when I still believed holidays could be magic. We drank it in front of the fire, in our own house now, surrounded by books and mess and ordinary happiness. "Mum," he said, his voice deeper now, almost a man's voice. "Thank you." "For what?" "For not letting them win." I thought about that phrase, letting them win. I used to think winning meant destruction. Now I know better. "They didn't lose either," I said. "Not really, they just missed out on you, on me, on everything we've become. That's their loss." "Yes," I agreed. "It really is." The fire crackled. The wine was warm. Outside, Edinburgh sparkled in the December darkness, full of possibility. We sat together in the quiet and watched the snow begin to fall.